who manages one of the big hotels here, the Radisson Blu Hotel in the Midwest. And we have Anne Marr, who's responsible for social enterprise and the director of the Urban Co-op. So the format of this morning is I'd like to hand over to the speakers and introduce them one by one. And then our colleague Dennis Barrett with Cork Learning City will chair the question and answer session. And if you'd like to come in with questions and answers at that point. We hope to finish the event between 10:15 or 11:15 and 11:30, allowing you get some time back in your life. So our first speaker this morning is Stephen Cunneen. Stephen runs Limerick Treaty City Brewery, and it's a treaty city we're known as here in our history. And it's based in the heart of the medieval quarter in Limerick. Stephen is a graduate of our local university, the Limerick Institute of Technology and the University of Limerick. And I'm going to hand over to Stephen to talk us through his experience in running a business in a time of COVID. So over to you, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Emer. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, thumbs up, good. First off, thanks very much for having me on, and yeah, I'm delighted to be able to speak. I will say that I think Joe led in there, and even Emer, I think that mightn't be the best title. Learning in a changing business world. I think 2019 was a changing business world. 2020, learning through chaos is more of a be a bit more apt scenario. But yeah, so my name is Stephen Thomas Cunneen. I am the owner, proprietor, and general do everything else of Treaty City Brewery. We're a small batch brewery based in the medieval quarter in Limerick City. Limerick City being the third biggest city in the Republic, and probably the fifth biggest city on the island. Yeah, we produce beers for the local artisan, high-end artisan beers for the local, national and international market, soon to be international market anyway, we can always hope. Yeah, so I have a degree, as Emer was saying, I have a degree in manufacturing engineering, and my background is, I also have I'm a black belt in Six Sigma. My background is, I left UL and I went and worked for 3.5 years, 4 years with Intel in Dublin. About 9 months of which I was a seed engineer in Portland in Oregon, and then I came home and did a ramp here in Dublin in their technology development department, Fab 24. At which point I left, decided to go travel in North America, and myself and my wife, then girlfriend I suppose, went to Vancouver in Canada. We spent 7 years there, and I came home and decided I'd open up Treaty City Brewery. Yeah, so the last 12 months and learning in the last 12 months, I'm a big advocate, and I'll have to say, of learning all the way through my career. I've always been doing courses and trying to learn, and it's amazing. As I was thinking about this morning and what I was going to say, it reminded me of my grandfather. On my mother's side, all my mother's people are all teachers and stuff, and he used to say, you know, it's a very Limerick way of saying education is no burden, but the way he would say it is aid the learning. So that was his accent in the Limerick one. So yeah, Treaty City Brewery, we started off the year, we opened this facility that we're in, you can see it on the slide there, that's our second facility, that's our kind of front of house facility, and we started that facility last year and just kind of opened it up. So it's a tourist facility and also a place where we can do small batch production and kind of experimental beers. The whole idea was that we would have a beer market and an on-trade market, i.e. pubs and restaurants, and also we would have tourism coming through our doors, and being in the medieval quarter, we were gearing towards that. When February 2020 hit, or March, I suppose, early March, it was a massive shock. So a massive shock to us. About 85% of our business dropped off, which is huge. Most of our business would be on trade, and we would be selling pints and stuff into pubs like that. So we had to learn and we had to adapt. And I think it's the key word over the last 6 months has been that, how to adapt. We were selling predominantly into local businesses here in Limerick, but the market so the sales channel had actually obviously imploded, but the market was still there. We had people who were in lockdown at home, and they were still looking to drink and enjoy Treaty City beer. So what we looked at was, okay, how can we get our beer out there and get our product out there in the environment of a lockdown? The main thing we kind of came up with and we did was we started an online selling. And what we started to do was we started to reach out first via our socials, but then via we actually redeveloped a web page and started to sell down through the web, use that as a sales funnel for selling to people at home. At the start, it was basically me delivering in a van, and then we managed to partner up with Fastways, who were a local courier here, and we were delivering directly to home. So homes, basically people who were in lockdown. Now, the very strange thing that we found, and the learning, I suppose, in the development from our market, was about 86% of the beer that we sold online actually started to go to the Dublin market. So we would have had some small presence via fine wines or small off licenses in Dublin selling off sales, but in general terms, we had no real presence in Dublin. And that was a huge development for us, right? So what we had to do was we had to step back basically and kind of align all of our socials and our social medias and push towards the Dublin market. Yeah, so I would say it has been a massive 6 months. We're still down about maybe 50% of our annual turnover, but in general terms, we're continuously month on month growing that back and bringing that back. Yeah. Does that give you a quick idea who we are and what we're going?
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you so much, because I think you're hitting the sort of the nail on the head in telling us, you know, you're down 50% and you had to move to online. And this is really what this business seminar is about. And I like your reference to chaos, because how quickly we had to change our business practice, change our business model, and sort of move very quickly to new models of delivery and new models of production. So what I'm actually saying to those listening is that we have the chat, and people can put questions in the chat if they want. Stephen, sorry, did you want to come back in there?
So like what we found was, and it was amazing to me, was that the market. So obviously COVID happened and it hit, but the market itself was still there. It was the sales channels and the funnels and how we sold that had to adapt and had to change. We had to learn a new way to reach that market. People were still out there. People were still drinking beer. People are still wanting to socialize, albeit in a COVID manner. And we had some great learnings. Just even if you look at people who are dedicated to the company, dedicated to the brand, dedicated to what we do. I had people who were buying beer in the real early days, about end of March, beginning of April. I had people who were buying beer from us that I know are not beer drinkers, that are wine drinkers. And they lived in, they were thinking of, you know what, Treaty City, I want to live in the city, or I want to be in a world where Treaty City still survives. So they were purchasing our product to try to keep us alive, basically. And that kind of, that spurred us on, right? That allowed us to kind of give us a little drive. And like the hardest thing about this whole process and this whole time has been to keep, like you mentioned employment in your bio as you started. Like I have 4 people employed, 4.5 people employed here. They're the most important people to me. Obviously I have to bring home money and I have to put food on the table, but it's not just about a brand, or it's about selling beer, or, you know, doing our thing. It's about creating an environment for my employees, but also the wider community, the people who buy our beer, who buy into what we want to do and how we do it, and to create that environment for those guys. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Stephen. And what we'll do is we'll let others come in with questions later on, and we'll come back to you then, maybe to come into the chat with Dennis. But thank you for that quick step through Treaty Breweries. And I like your grandfather's expression, to ate it, as they say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ate the learning. Okay, so I'm going to mute the mic for you, and I'm going to move the conversation on to Elena Fitzgerald-Kane. Now, Elena Fitzgerald-Kane, we're delighted Elena has time to be with us this morning, because as well as being a local hotelier in the region for generations, Elena actually heads up our Irish Hotel Federation, and I let her speak to that in a moment. She's the president of that. But Elena has worked with us in the Education Training Board and the Universities and Institutes of Technology there in March and April and May, as we tried as a city and a region to look at how we could upskill and what we could do during a COVID pandemic that was taking everybody by surprise. And certainly the hospitality industry has been hugely affected in the downturn of jobs. So Elena, thank you so much for giving of your time to be here. We're delighted, and I'm going to pass over to you to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. And as I was listening to Stephen there and thinking about chaos, you forget sometimes the chaos, you know, it's not just in the world, it transcends and it goes so far away. So maybe Yvonne, if that's okay, we might just move on to the next slide there, if that's okay. So folks, I am genuinely delighted to be I suppose speaking with you today and learning from you in terms of what's going on. You know, the last few months have been just, I suppose, incredible. From my own perspective, many of you probably know, my parents 37 years ago established their own hotel, Fitzgerald's Woodlands House Hotel and Spa, and over the last 37 years we've morphed into the resort style property we have. Some of the people that are working with us have been working with us for 37 years. We have multi-generations of families, we've indeed whole households. So we're acutely, I suppose, we're very, very close to that whole sense of what's going on in the industry. And, you know, our team, we do consider as being part of our extended family. At the end of February, I had the great honour at the time of becoming the president of the Irish Hotels Federation. I followed in the footsteps of my mother, Mary, who was the first president 20 years ago, but actually in her tenure, there was foot him out and there was 9/11. So I think it's fair to say you'll never see a Fitzgerald in the role again. I'd say we'll be banished so quickly. But on the very first day of our new job and all the excitement that I had, my 10-point plan of where I wanted to go and what I want to achieve over the 2 years was actually our very first COVID meeting. And look, we all know where it's morphed since then. It's unimaginable, unthinkable, and it's required us to recalibrate ourselves, I suppose, personally and equally in terms of professionally in our business lives. I suppose I always consider myself to be an educator. I lectured for a few years in the areas of kind of business and hospitality. I'm also a member of the board of the LCETB over the course of the last little while. So we might just move on from there, Yvonne, if that's okay. So I just want to give you a sense of our tourism community before COVID. We were 270,000 very proud people, 1 in 10 of all Irish jobs, Ireland's largest indigenous industry, and very much kind of an export component. You often don't associate that with tourism. But a key thing here is 70% of jobs were outside of Dublin. So we always had kind of that regional argument about who we were and investing in us, because you're getting right into communities. And, you know, in some communities, they're actually completely sustained by tourism. Interestingly enough, Dublin and some of our urban areas, including Limerick City, have performed so poorly that they now have become the new regions. It's kind of mad. And you know, that obviously has been it's been made all the worse since level 3 was introduced and that. So we might just pop on from there, Yvonne. So I just want to kind of give a sense of, you know, the numbers that were involved. So when I think of COVID challenges, I don't want to get into my own personal experience too much because I know Brian's going to be speaking after. But I remember the 14th of March as being that kind of key day where it all started to completely unravel. On the 12th of March, hospitality businesses were faced with kind of a quasi-lockdown, you know, restriction of 100 people. And so somebody was hosting their wedding the next day or due to host it the day after. But I remember doing a media thing in RTE, it was a radio panel, and driving home in a very quiet M50. And I rang my brother Dave and I said, you know what, we'd actually be better off if the government closed us down. The pressure of, you know, I suppose in terms of protecting our teams and our guests, and how do you balance that then with promises you've made, you know, to couples and people in terms of your commitments. So it was extraordinary, but we took the brave decision to close on the 16th, something we'd never done outside of Christmas Day. And I suppose the biggest concern for us was in terms of our team and our income supports. And as I suppose kind of unraveled that with her family and how would we do it, and even for my mother, just trying to get her head around how could you be closing, but it was the natural thing to do. But it was a sense of what would be there for our people. And we were very lucky that there were schemes. People worked very hard on it from a governmental level to make sure that there was support schemes there. And yes, they were at a basic level, but they did evolve. They weren't perfect, but they certainly became more supportive as they went along. And I remember reading something about Donald Trump, a video talking about religious services at Easter. Many of you might have seen it, and he was asked about the Old Testament and the New Testament. And clear as day, he probably didn't know anything about any of the Testament or even how to spell the Bible within reason. But it was that sense of, wouldn't it be great to see people back at services at Easter? And that was a sense of, oh my God, that's a month away. And obviously it evolved on. But what became very apparent very quickly was the need for upskilling for reopening, number one, but equally in terms of career development, because there was a real sense of, you know, at what stage would we open? Would all of the tourism businesses be able to sustain it? Because from a March perspective, it's the worst possible time of the year. In terms of you've invested a lot in your business over the winter, you might have traded as well, but you're kind of what we call front loading your expenditure for the year, and you trade on the back of that. So from a cash flow perspective, it was the worst possible time. And we were very lucky that the Midwest response came together. So that obviously includes the Midwest Regional Skills Forum, ETBs, ITs, universities, just a whole sense of collaboration, and indeed our own hospitality centre, who've always been amazing. And in tandem with that, then the whole sense of health and well-being in terms of our team, making sure they're being looked after, that the social dynamic of their job was very much in situ. So Yvonne, if you're okay, maybe just to move on there. And then, when you kind of settled with that and grappled with it, all of a sudden we were fast forwarded opening 3 weeks early. And all of a sudden then you were literally going, full on into kind of getting ready to reopen, utilising those skills that people were learning. We certainly had an edge in Limerick in terms of what was available to us, what support. So I think when we opened with the wind at our backs, I don't know of any other counties that would have had, the QQI level 5, infectious disease and control programme. So we operated at a very, very high level. And I think we were really, really well positioned, and certainly the excellence in terms of hospitality and being ready for opening in a post-COVID world, we had that here. And it was because of the way that people came together and the resources that were here and how they leveraged and a can-do attitude to get it done. So I'm very, very thankful for it. There's so many challenges in terms of the new way. It's a sense of learning as a journey. And I think we've learned that, so even when we reopened, every day there was reviews at the end of each shift in terms of what could we do differently, etc. Now we're probably at a different stage of the journey. We might just hop on to the next slide if that's okay. Where I suppose we're trying to look into the future that little bit more. And it's difficult to talk about recovery when the reality is you're now talking about survival in some respects, survival and sustainable trading, and then that whole sense of recovery. And really, it's about the steps. We all thought we would have been much further along in terms of sustainability and working towards recovery at this stage. But what has really, really come to the fore is the role of education, training and upskilling in that journey, and training for the future. And I suppose doing it in an inclusive way. So, traditionally it's the TY students. I remember one of the first concerns we had is, oh my God, do we still continue to offer TY programs? And reassured by the fact that if the TY students went through the exact same training, if they were mentored correctly, because it was the risk to them, the risk to ourselves, but you can't stop training. So it's training at different levels. It's from the person coming into their first job at, TY, and all the hopes and aspirations they have in terms of working, that they have that right to that learning. And it's going right through in terms of career progression, and it's going across all cultures, all nationalities, genders, everything. But it's that sense of tandem training. So a lot of our own team would have said, God, I haven't done anything for a long, long while. But now I think, we're in a situation where we're really recognizing the fact that, well, look, you don't have to stop everything to train, or you don't have to do it in blocks. You can do it as you go along. And I think the resources that we have here in Limerick, and I suppose what people are trying to replicate across the country, is very much to have that sense of tandem training as you go along. And it's at different levels for different people, but working towards the bigger picture. And I suppose for me, the bigger picture is I would love to see CPD training in terms of it being a model for our industry. We see it in so many others, professions, in terms of everything from accountants to solicitors to auctioneers, etc. But I think that's a really, really important part of where we need to go to. And I think now that we've taken the first steps in terms of recalibrating our training and rethinking how we apply training and doing it in tandem with what we're doing, that for me is the big picture. And it probably wasn't something that was on my radar when I delivered the 10-point plan about what I want to do as part of my presidency, but it's very much in that space now. So I think we're almost probably near the end of my slides there. So I just want to pop on if that's okay. So just from an Irish Hotels Federation, we've always had a dedicated HR specialist. We've always had employment support helpline there in terms of helping our teams. But what we've done is we've changed, I suppose, committees to very active working groups. One is education, training and upskilling. And I suppose that's really just kind of starting to come into its own right now. We're very lucky that we have Minister Simon Harris, who's really, really energetic. And he didn't come from, I suppose, a traditional kind of education model, or what would be regarded as a traditional education model. And that is actually the best thing that we could have for somebody, in that it really opens up other avenues in terms of training and lifelong training. And the fact that it's separated from the general education piece, I just think that's really, really an amazing opportunity, because we get all of his enthusiasm and the fact that it's new. So we're creating our own in these times. And as they always say, never waste a crisis, you know, to try and get something really, really valuable and good out of it. What we've also done is HR and mindfulness, that whole sense of protecting, I suppose, the mental health of our members and their families and their teams and their families. So we've put a whole program in place, and it does focus on things like right now after yesterday, you know, people are worried about mortgages, and you know, they were always worried about them, but now there's kind of a sense of, look, it won't automatically happen for me. I have to go back and I have to talk about it. So we carry all those worries with us. And I suppose what's critical for us is that, you know, we're always learning. And one of my other points was just in terms of having tourism as part of school curricula. I'd like to see that happening from, I suppose, primary school onwards. It's probably the only one out of my 10 points that I really feel I haven't had quite the shot at, because everything else is naturally falling in it. So I might just pop onto the last slide there. It's very conscious of time. So I suppose maybe just to complete, in terms of benefits, there's so much benefit from training. I'm very much into lifelong education myself. I'm always doing courses. The most recent ones I've done have been in Cornell University. That's my second run at it, obviously all online at the moment. I was laughing when I saw Dennis earlier saying, I know that name, and I realized that we did a course years ago back in the day down in Cork. So it's amazing how it comes around again. But the benefits to individuals, we're trying to build our own people's skill base, and we're trying to build them that they can do their jobs better. They can learn new skills, okay? They can, I suppose the team gets the benefit of it. Tourism providers, whether they're a hotel or the broader tourism community, they get it. It goes to other sectors. You know, sometimes we train people and they've really, really wonderful skills and they get the opportunity to work in other sectors. And that's probably the toughest part now in terms of people, you know, that we may not have the same level of opportunity as growth. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that when we do get back going, we absolutely will be very viable and a very, I suppose, a really great lever of growth when it comes to recovery. After the last recession, tourism created 90,000 jobs, so huge opportunity. And life skills. We all know that our tourism skills, you know, and life skills and what happens at home are very much intertwined. So I suppose we're learning for retention. We all know the costs of not being able to retain people. It's about 20,000. Every time you lose somebody from our sector, it's a cost of about 20,000. We're learning for capability, greater edge, and greater development, I suppose, of your teams, the organization, your service promise, and indeed your productivity. And I suppose from my own perspective, I never ever see training as a cost. I always see it as an investment, and it doesn't matter what stage you're at. And yes, sometimes, you know, people will leave, and that's worse because sometimes we see it as a personal failure that we didn't deliver or we didn't have the support, but you're part of their journey and they're part of yours. And I think we all learn from each other. So I suppose, look, hopefully that gives you kind of a little bit of an insight. I was just very conscious of Brian and just trying to deliver more of a national picture. So thank you very, very much.
Elena, thank you very much. I think it's hugely interesting, and I'm sure it'll come up in the questions when you talk about, you know, 1 in every 10 jobs. And, you know, when you also talk about the two words that leapt off the page for me in the presentation were survival and being sustainable. And in many ways, that's what your industry and what other industries are trying to do. And the business community in Limerick is working together. Just for some of our visitors this morning who wouldn't be familiar with our terminology, when Elena refers to ETBs, there are education training boards, which actually I work for myself and would handle the area of apprenticeships and training and skills and that. And when we say LIT and UL, the University of Limerick, world-renowned university, is obviously located in our city, and the Institutes of Technology as well. So there are higher education and further education training sectors working together to deliver training where possible and when possible with the business communities. I'm going to move on to Brian Harrington. Brian Harrington is a well-known hotelier in Limerick City, has been in the hotel business for a long time, and many of us know him and have worked with him. And he is managing the Radisson Blu Hotel, he'll tell you about it himself, a wonderful property on the outskirts of the city with great business from overseas as well, visiting County Clare and Cliffs of Moher and places like that. But I'm going to hand over to Brian because he and his staff have been directly affected, obviously, by air travel and everything else that goes with it. So Brian, if I could hand over to you and you could bring us through your slides.
Thank you, Emer, and good morning to everybody, and thank you guys for having me here today. Elaine has obviously given a very comprehensive national picture, and I might just be able to give you a flavour for what's happening from a local perspective. So, Yvonne, if you just flick on to the next slide, please. Okay, just while Yvonne is doing that, I'm just going to give you an overview of our business. So the Radisson Blu in Limerick has 154 bedrooms. It's a 4-star property. It was opened in the early 70s, and it was built, I suppose, to meet that growing demand of tourists at the time, and of course the popularity of transatlantic flights from Shannon. So we've been around quite a bit, and I suppose there's been two big stages in the history of the property since then. In 02, it became a Radisson managed property, and now it's a Radisson franchise property, but it was bought out of receivership in 2014, which I suppose came at the end of the most previous recession. But I joined the property in 2014, and our markets, I suppose, since then have been, I suppose, in tandem of what other properties locally are pursuing, is international tourism market, domestic leisure, and corporate and conference markets. And of course, all the associated food and beverage business that comes from those source markets. And we also operate a very successful spa. So in the 6 years running up to this year, we managed to grow revenue each year. And actually 2019 was a record year for the property. So we really were on a high as we faced into 2020. And we won't go over, I suppose, the March experience, but we were shut from Patrick's Day right through until late July, the 23rd of July, was when we deemed it appropriate to open, and when we deemed to have enough business on the books to warrant being open. And all of a sudden, all our business sources were gone, with the only exception being our domestic leisure. And we had some presence in that, thank God, and we've had some great growth in that area. But all of a sudden, we were open to a market that every other property in the country was also chasing. So we were really fighting over a relatively small cake. And right now, we're probably looking at a drop of 65% of revenues year on year. And bear in mind that we actually were trading for January, February, and part of March, and at normal levels. But I think as every month goes on, that drop in revenue will continue to grow in contrast to last year. So it's a really challenging period all of a sudden. Right now, we've got a very small corporate market, and the core of our business now is our domestic leisure business. And you know, of course, from last week when Dublin was effectively locked down, that took another huge chunk of our source market out of play. So we're at relatively low levels by any comparison to our history. Vaughan, if I could have next slide, please. So the challenges, of course, to us, I think were the speed of its impact. As I said, like, we were going from a thriving business in March to zero revenue, I think from the 18th of March. And I think that really kind of was very, very challenging. And now, you know, from that moment on, your focus is, how am I going to sustain this? How do we start to rebuild the business? What markets are likely to bounce back first? And you quickly realize, of course, that you've never had an experience where you've gone from operating a business with strong business levels to zero, and you have very little control over it. And even now, I think the challenge continues to be the uncertainty of it. We don't have any end date in sight, and whilst we opened in July and we were, I suppose, pleased and delighted to be back open and delighted to start rebuilding our business, the continuous kind of stopping and starting and uncertainty, I think, creates a great sense of powerlessness. But we have to deal, I suppose, with what's in front of us. But it's hard to kind of keep everybody on track each week and to keep everybody focused. As a result of the changed environment, we have to find ways, I suppose, to weather the storm. And unfortunately, one of the first things we had to do was to, and I hate using the terms, to kind of right size our operating model to suit the business. So we probably had 146 employees on our books in March, and we probably have, I suppose, active employees now, 54, 55 people. And I'm sure our story is the case across the region. But we have to greatly adapt the way we go about our hotel business. We don't offer the same level of facilities. We don't offer the same amount of opening hours. But at the same time, we're doing our damnedest to make everybody's guests' most memorable stay with us. Needless to say, in having to reopen, we had to retrain all our people again in reopening protocols. Everybody will be familiar, I suppose, with the proliferation of signage in businesses, the erection of screens in in the likes of a hospitality businesses, really unnerving, and a team of people going around continuously sanitizing areas is very reassuring, but it really is a peculiar normal. So certainly has been and continues to be a very challenging time. So Yvonne, if I could have next slide, please. During the period, and Elena and Emer have mentioned it, most of our people, bar 8, were on layoff pretty much from the third week in March. And we were very fortunate to have that initiative underway very, very quickly, led by Dennis O'Kelly, Emer, Joe Ledden, and others who quickly realized the need to provide training for the different sectors who were most impacted by the pandemic. And in our case, it happened to be the hospitality industry and the retail industry. And I'm proud to say that the hotel industry locally really rallied around this, and we were delighted to have the opportunity to provide training for our employees. And we had 608 people or courses undertaken by the local hotel industry, and that presented us with a great opportunity. We managed to obviously do all the training online, but the great benefit from it, I think, was it gave our employees a great awareness, I suppose, of the value of training and the availability of training in the region. For many of us had no idea of the amount of training that was available locally, and to be fair to all the providers, a huge amount of it is available free and online. So that gave us a great, I suppose, sense of purpose during the lockdown, that we were able to reach out to our employees and to offer them a wide variety of training, which they duly accepted. And they continued to undertake training, which is a real benefit of that initiative. And then, of course, as Elena said, all of a sudden we were deemed to be able to open. And whilst we were maybe 2.5 weeks after others, there was that whole pre-opening training, which tended to be kind of compliance training that we undertook in advance of opening. And as a result, I suppose, of our reopening and the model we're operating now, we have had new roles appearing. We've had merging of certain positions, and that's been very welcome for some people, and they have responded to it very positively. In terms of training now, I think it's very well said, Elena, that it should always be seen as an investment rather than a cost. But right now, for us, we're trying to minimize expenditure, and in some cases it tends to be a cost. And whereas in the past we had the availability of time for people, we now have people, I suppose, almost fully employed. Less people, but fully employed. And we have found now that in order for us to develop the training, rather than, I suppose, hourly sessions or having people brought in for a morning or afternoon, we're trying to break it down into bite-sized chunks now. So our training happens to take place at the commencement of each shift. So we might take a particular topic and give it 10 minutes before we kick off the day's business. And that's how we plan to continue training for the time being. And of course, we're also very anxious to promote all the training that is available locally. Yvonne, if I could have the next slide, please. Some of the lessons that we learned during the COVID-19, well, for me, I think it's just the ongoing fragility of business. And I think I'm reminded of the lyrics from the song, That's Life. When you're riding high in April and shot down in May, I think we could have done that in March and April. It felt like, it really was a real shock to the system. Anyway, as we adapt, I think it's become apparent that online works. I have a son at home working for a company locally, and they've been home since March, and they don't plan to be back in offices until January. And I think even then, there's no obligation to go back. That's scary in one way. It's not as easy for our business, but there are certain roles in our business who can quite easily operate remotely. Personally, I think we've all had to become a bit more, or I've had to become more strategic looking rather than dealing with today and next week, is how are we going to develop a business that is able to respond quickly to the upturn in business and the economy. And the other thing was the appeal of training as a means of preparing us for the future. And I think that has been borne out by the appetite for training that was demonstrated during the lockdown period, and the great value of lifelong training for our teams and for ourselves, so that we are maybe better prepared to deal with the future. And the last slide, if I may. So my thoughts, I suppose, for the future was that it's become a very changed marketplace. I don't see corporate business returning like it was in the past. I think the savings that some companies are accruing as a result of the almost ban on travel and meetings is far too lucrative. And I think unfortunately, a big chunk of the corporate world will continue to embrace the technology and remote working. And that has an impact, I suppose, for many businesses. So the traditional sources of business that we've enjoyed, I think, have changed. And the new ways of working have that impact on our business. If we don't have that same level, I suppose, of corporate activity locally, the city, I think, more so than the regional properties will suffer. I'm sorry to be negative, but I am, I suppose, a bit concerned about the region, and I'm concerned about the recent talk about Shannon Airport and Cork Airport. And at the same time, I think now is a perfect opportunity for the government to have a relook at aviation policy to ensure that when the economy does pick up again, that the regional airports are given a great opportunity to prosper in the future. And then I'm encouraged by the fact that we have some experience, I suppose, in this regard. We've been through recessions in the past, and a strong focus on our own business fundamentals will certainly leave us well prepared to deal with it when the economy begins to re-emerge.
Thank you, Brian.
But there, Emer,
Thanks very much. No, you were fine. You were 35 seconds over. We'll allow you that. Brian, thank you very much. And if I might say, it is a hugely insightful look. And it's good that you didn't spare us any of the detail, because I think we were having a business seminar this morning, and we were having a look at business in a UNESCO learning city, and we were looking at how that business and how businesses have been affected. And there's no point in sugarcoating it. I was really interested in the way you used the words, the enormity and the uncertainty, and they lead to powerlessness. And I think that's bigger than the hotel industry. It's across, you know, at whatever sector we're at, that's intersecting the elderly, the middle-aged, the students at college, the young people in the workforce. And I just thought it was very powerful. I'd be stealing that and using it myself, but I think it, not to be glib about it, I think it speaks to the bigger picture, which is the uncertainty of everything has led to a powerlessness. And how we all navigate our way through that is going to be hugely challenging, interesting, and even for those of us who have been through other recessions, it's a very different space. So thank you for that. It was hugely insightful, and I hope that those listening to it and those from outside our region see what we're struggling with as a sort of the third city in a country of a number of cities, you know, with regional airports and regional tourism, and how that works for us. So there were plenty of questions later on, and Dennis will look at that discussion. I'm going to move to Anne Marr, who is the director of the Urban Co-op, and it's a social enterprise. And I suppose Anne is going to give us a very different, but similar, I'm sure. We're moving from tourism into social enterprise and the impact of COVID on her business. So Anne, thank you very much for being here with us this morning, and I'm going to pass over to you now. If you just unmute your mic there, Anne. Anne, we can't hear you.
I better unmute myself, so.
Absolutely, thank you.
I'm delighted to give a presentation today, but I have to say, after following Brian there, I have to pull myself together after that. So bear with me as I tell you the story about the Urban Co-op with it. And for those who don't know about who we are actually Limerick Community Grocery. It was set up about 7 years ago as a buying club on Mulgrave Street in Limerick, just a small group of people, 19 people. And it has grown in that time now to having, we have over 2,500 members now. And it trades as the Urban Co-op. In those 7 years now, it has morphed into different beings as such. We're now in our third premises in Eastway. And basically it's a grocery shop on a very basic level, but it's also a well-being hub. So we do classes as well for Pilates, yoga, meditation, etc. So as a social enterprise, how we were hit with the pandemic, I will have to say that we were well placed, that we had just put together our strategic plan. If this pandemic had happened last year, we were dead in the water. We would not be having this conversation. There would be no Urban Co-op. But I do feel that the pandemic happened just at a time as we were starting to dig our roots down a little bit deeper. And with our strategic plan, we were starting to come together and be more organized ourselves. So in a way, the timing was better. But we're learning every day. Absolutely, we don't have all the answers. But one of the things I wanted to point out about what we have learned, I'm personally finding it very interesting every day. I find the place, it's a very fascinating project. But it's interesting from a grassroots level that actually when there is a crisis, we do revert back to the basics again. And the thing with the Urban Co-op is we sell a lot of nourishing, basic traditional foods, and people did start to come back towards them again at a time when the crisis hit. And there definitely has been more appreciation for it. So perhaps if you just pop it on to the next slide. I don't have any photographs. I just have a diagram really of an ethos overview really of what we do. And I have it down as 4 words: cook, connect, contribute, cope. And I wouldn't, I haven't made this up. It's, I've borrowed it from Dr. Robert Lustig in terms of these are 4 areas that help us to keep our serotonin and our well-being in check. And it's something that's been very much challenged in the pandemic. But the idea of cook, you know, cooking or eating nourishing food in order to keep ourselves well is something that I would personally be very interested in. And now more than ever, it was more of a time to definitely do this. So if you just pass it on to the next slide, I'll go through each of those areas. One of the things that we saw, again, as soon as the pandemic hit, you'll remember that there was panic buying by the population. People rushed to the shops to buy their food. We had the same situation. We had a spike in sales, definitely. And interestingly, when we were chatting to the customers, you'd have a very strong interface with the customers. The first day, we were watching our phones and saying what was happening with the schools closing. As soon as the schools were closed, the mothers went to the wine rack and started buying the wine. That was the first thing that really started to sell. But as it happened, we ended up having a big spike in sales, but very, very quickly, we don't have a huge stock. Very quickly, we were running into problems with getting stock. But we also had problems with staff who felt very nervous, who went home, and volunteers who would have been the lifeblood of our business. Because it was a community grocery, we relied very heavily on them for hours of work. They went home. So we were very, very stuck on the one hand, thinking that we would actually, would we close the doors? Would the government say to us, no, you weren't an essential business? And we felt very insecure as well. However, what we did do is we did rally together, and a few of us who were on the board, we actually came off the board and went straight into just doing the work. We rostered ourselves into 2 definite rosters, both times of the week, split down the staff into 2 and said, right, you're working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you're working Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And just reduced down our hours of contact with the customers, and said, listen, this is what we can do. In order to maintain the security and access of the food. We also had we had a load of phone calls starting to come in as well from suppliers, because around the time they closed the markets as well. So a lot of the small suppliers said, well, look, will you sell my food? So we were getting extra demand from customers and extra demand from suppliers. So we had to navigate ourselves to get to that point. So in a way, from me personally, I've always championed the local suppliers and the local producers and said, please, you must appreciate who these people are, who these farmers are, these horticulture lists. They're working very hard. They're providing food for us. And if we don't appreciate it by paying the cost of it is, we will have problems when we can't access this food. And we would have had problems. We do import as well, so we would have had problems with access of food not getting to us. We'd order it, but it wouldn't come to us. So we had to, again, navigate that ourselves. But I have to say, it was very good to watch the customers learning in front of our eyes how valuable the local food was. And because we were also in a position to meet with them every day, they would tell us their stories as well. So we were in a way charting, like a social experiment, how the community was going through the pandemic. So initially, while everyone was fearful, you got to a point where people were at that stage where they were going, actually, now I have time at home. I'm glad I'm painting, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm glad to be away from work. They were so appreciative of the government payment, and people took time out for themselves. So their stress levels dropped down a bit, but that quickly gave way to the frustration of the long-term inevitability of COVID. And we're still going through that, I have to say. But what we found with the Urban Co-op itself, it became a bit of a meeting point for people, where people said they would coordinate themselves to come and do their shopping around the same time and the same day. The idea of queuing for a long time in the bigger supermarkets became less and less attractive. And people used the Urban Co-op as a place to move away from the social isolation. And it did provide a level of normality for people. And again, it was nice to be able to provide that for them. And again, as time went on, as the mask wearing came in, etc., we were trying to navigate our way around it. But in the meantime, we were like the ducks, quiet on the top, but underneath, we were swimming very hard in order to ensure continuity of supply and meet really and truly what was a growing demand, and the panic we went through ourselves, because as more customers were coming in, we weren't flush with money because we had extra demands. We had one of our income streams that we really relied on was room rental, and that went. So to rely heavily on the shop at a time when there was no grant funding, there was no extra support, we had to rely on the income that came in the door. And we had come from a place where there were grant supports prior to this. So for me personally, it was a huge learning to get to a point of how do we get the shop to be viable. And being perfectly honest, it's not totally viable yet, but it's moving towards that. But I have to say, we're constantly questioning like how to improve things. And we are sort of moving towards a fundraising model as well to plug a few gaps. But we're also incredibly aware that, like that, as Brian went through, there are other businesses who had no income coming in the door. And we recognized, look, we have income coming through the door. People do, this is a valuable service. And also we were very fortunate as well to get that feedback directly from customers who would say, please keep doing what you're doing. You really are helping my mental health by being here. And so it's not just about the provision of good local food, but actually that social connection was extremely important, especially at this time. So we're very much, that connection area is something we're very strong on. And we work very hard to create an environment that makes people feel safe to meet, etc. So we've loads of stories of individuals who are like benefiting from connections at the Urban Co-op. So again, we're also trying very hard to be normal, and like we would talk to the staff and say, please do not bring your own stresses to the customer. And I have to say, to be fair to the staff, they have been fantastic, and we've worked very hard to kind of keep their lives as normal as possible as well. Provision of childcare, you know, rostering, making sure that people's needs are being met so that they feel calm and cool and collected and are able to do their job because they're meeting a lot of customers who are in stressful situations. So if you want to move on to the next one.
I'm going to give you 1 more minute, Anne, okay?
Okay, here we go. Right, we have learned, yes, to be very flexible, absolutely. A lot of people are contributing an awful lot towards, have contributed a lot to get the Urban Co-op where it has come to. Volunteers are starting to come back, thanks be to God. That's all I say. Right, the last bit there about COPE, yes, it's continually stressful, the whole thing, but at the same time I will say the environment of the Urban Co-op has been one that we find has taught us a resilience that we never thought we had. I have found it personally that the whole journey of the project of the Urban Co-op has been incredibly stressful to get it to the point it is now, but COVID has actually got us to dig so deep into our own reserves, and I have found an amazing team who are capable of doing amazing things, and at this stage now we're looking forward to the future. It's kind of, we've come over a bit of a hump where we've gone, you know, if we've survived this much, what are we capable of doing? So that's where we're at now. We've applied for a loan through Community Finance Ireland. It's something we would never have dreamt of doing last year, but now we're in it for the long haul, and we're actually looking at maybe food tourism and different areas of where we can fit. But you know, the Urban Co-op is a very special project. It's not just a shop, it's far more than that. It's really a platform for social change, and we're very proud it's in Limerick. We're very proud it's past 7 years, so we're on to the new era.
Thanks, Anne. Thank you so much. And in actual fact, I think the mantra of cope, cook, contribute, and connect, it really speaks to, you know, it speaks to more than yourselves. It speaks, as you say, to the whole piece. Did I interrupt you? Was that your final slide there? Was it the?
It's all right, Emer. It's all right. No, this picture is the brand, and it does encompass who we are and what we are, you know.
Yeah, and thank you so much, because, and I think one of the things you mentioned there, which many of us, it was the early days of COVID when the sun was shining and we were in that early stage of coping. There was a certain resilience, and, you know, people could hear bird song, and there was much written about, we could hear bird song and there was no traffic. But there was no doubt, and both you and Brian have alluded to that, when it continued on, it becomes a different picture, you know, and that's where there's some interesting challenges. What I want to do is I want to thank the speakers. I want to move to the discussion part with Dennis, because I want to keep the whole thing moving with from a time perspective. So we're being joined by our colleagues from Australia this morning, from Wyndham Learning City as well. So it's great that you're on with us. And it's good to have, you know, many different people have dropped in or popped in and out of this conversation this morning, which is the whole community of UNESCO learning cities around the world and how we work together and share our learning and share our experiences. Could I ask Dennis if you'd like to come in maybe here, Dennis? And I know, Anne, there's questions in the chat, so if you want to come in and chair the questions and answer session.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Thanks, Emer, and thanks to Limerick. To Learning Limerick for the invitation to be involved, as I feel at this stage I'm kind of part of your team, as you are of our team in Cork. We're always delighted to have a new opportunity to learn from you and to learn together. And I thought all the panelists this morning, all the inputs were fascinating. Really, there was a huge depth of insight and a feeling of being able to really put oneself in the shoes of any of the speakers for a brief few minutes. And I want to thank them for that. I think the interaction across the four has been fascinating. To start to generate a number of discussion points, I did want to offer the opportunity to the panelists to ask a question of each other. All of you have engaged in this topic, in the question around how learning and business interacts with each other in the context of crisis, or of chaos, as Stephen described it. So I might start with Stephen. Stephen, just to offer you a chance, if there was any of the other contributors this morning that you wanted to ask a question of. Stephen, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I actually, Brian, you mentioned about the downscaling or resizing. I don't know what the PC term is it for the staff. Can you tell me, how did that affect morale? How did you manage that large amount of staff being jettisoned from the group, and then how did you manage that?
Well, I think we've been greatly supported, I suppose, by the subsidies that have been in vogue since, I suppose, March and April. So that has kind of, I suppose, put the inevitable on the long finger. But in some cases, I suppose you'll all experience, some people are quite happy to remain out of work, and to, who can live on the payment quite happily. But I suppose one of the elements of our business is that we have a huge amount of part-time employees. So in some cases, it's a second job, or in some cases, it's students. So I suppose they recognize and they've come to accept the volatile nature of our business. So we, in most cases, we were able to do it by kind of just reducing the availability of hours. But a department like our meeting and events, which would have been, really, really busy every weekend with banqueting and conferencing, I don't think we've had anybody bar maybe one or two people working that area since March. So in some cases, the summer has come and gone and they've gone back to college. In other cases, they have moved on and got other jobs. But I suppose in contrast to previous recessions, they've had the little bit of insulation or the benefit of the various payments to see them through the time when there was no work available. So to answer your question, Stephen, it seemed to kind of be expected. It wasn't a surprise to anybody. And we're obviously conscious of anybody who may be in a difficult spot, that we would always do our best where we can to prioritize return to work for them. But for many, they were able to look after themselves.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Brian, there. Just to go across the panel then, our next speaker was Elena. So again, just to offer Elena the opportunity to ask a question of any of the other panelists.
I suppose it's fascinating to hear kind of the approach, because, a lot of it is kind of mirrored in our own business and that. For me, it's that whole sense of, I suppose, striving to move forward and to create a motivation for training when there's a lot of the uncertainty in that around it. Maybe is there any lessons that anybody would like to share in terms of creating an appetite? So kind of follows on probably from Stephen's question to a degree.
Do you want to ask it of one of the panelists? This was just to broaden out. We will include the questions also from the audience. So Elaine, is there just one person you want to direct that at?
Yeah,
Can you repeat the question, Elena, please? Sorry,
very complicated. Maybe I might ask towards Stephen, just to torment you, because obviously you've had to completely repivot your business, and I'm sure there was times when you really, really were worried about the viability, or would that change in focus come quick enough? So I suppose how did you kind of, I suppose, pivot people, in terms of this is a new market and this is what we have to do to make that happen, and almost get them to rechange their focus again, and try and balance with the sense of, Jesus, if this doesn't work, how long can we stay going, that sort of thing?
For us, it came in, now we already had an internal structure for good communication, but I found myself that the increased communication, so as opposed to having a Monday morning ops meeting or a Monday mid-morning ops meeting, we went to 2 or 3 times per week. Technology really took over, because for a good part of 6 weeks or 7 weeks, we had some of the team working from home, and Gustavo and myself, the brewer and myself, actually in physically doing work. So I think communication is how we managed it. We set up internal WhatsApp groups to kind of departmentalize what we were doing. What was probably physical face-to-face communication turned into electronic communication, and then that ops meeting went from maybe once or twice a week to every morning we'd have a call or we'd have a Zoom call and stuff. And then the motivation was, I think it was through that communication was mainly being honest, right? So I, as I said at the start of we were down 85%. Everyone could see the volume of beer was not moving out. So there's no point in trying to, butter it over. What we did is I communicated continuously. So, hey guys, this is what our goals are for this week. And I found that if we set small goals and we kind of reiterated those goals, that people kind of could change their focus over a number of weeks, as opposed to, okay, we now no longer have this revenue stream, let's run it this direction, But yeah, I would say communication was key, and honesty with the staff, and pretty much laying it on the line and saying, this is where we are, guys, this is what we have, and this is how we're going to change.
Thanks.
What was strange actually for me personally was, sorry, just to jump in there, Dennis, was everyone, and I presume that everyone in business knows this, and see people, the staff look to me, right, and they look to the manager and they say, I have to be the Napoleon, right? I have to be the general. They have to follow the general into battle, right? And with that comes, and when I'm kind of giving the feedback to the team, they see that, yeah, you know what, Stephen doesn't have all the ideas and doesn't have all the knowledge, but we can work through it together, like, that kind of way.
Brilliant insight. Thanks, Stephen. Just around communications, yeah, key. I suppose even in terms of our own roles, just to share with you, my ordinary day job is to coordinate the development of Cork as a learning city during COVID. Myself and my colleague who's with us this morning, also Siobhan, were redeployed for a number of months, coordinating, in my case, a community response to COVID in Cork City. So there's been a whole range of different responses, really, that, and again, I would think communications at the heart of the successes of our efforts in that. To continue the move across the panel and to offer each panelist an opportunity to ask, Brian, you were the third speaker. Would you like to ask a question of any of the other speakers?
Yeah, this is a really difficult question now, but I suppose given where we are now, I wonder, would any of the speakers wish to offer an opinion as to when they think that their business would be back to where it was? Do you think we're months away or years away?
Okay, I'll maybe start with Elena. She's the first on my screen there, Elena. And again, I suppose there's a similarity in terms of the businesses that you both operate.
Yeah, I suppose it's interesting. Weddings are the mainstay of our business. So we would have been due to host 135 weddings this year. And I think we're going to be left with 50 or 57. It's something in that zone. But actually, 40% of what we have kind of in the latter part of the year are going ahead, albeit in a very different format. But interestingly, I was looking at next year and I said to myself, oh my God, if it actually stayed going the way it was, we'd be due to host 175 weddings. Now, that's not going to happen. But the reality is, I think it's that sense of when we do get going, within reason, we'll be fine. Because I suppose, like your business, Brian, we're not very, very dependent on overseas, because that's going to take a while to come back. And I think when you have events and you have that, and there is going to be a pent-up loyalty in that sense of, well, look, if I couldn't celebrate my 60th, I'll celebrate my 61st, or, that whole sense. So I think there's great goodwill there. But I do think we have to really repivot ourselves, domestically that little bit more, and not forget about the international piece. But I suppose to answer your question, on the challenge we have is, what was probably thought to be, I won't say a short-term problem, at points they're talking about, well, at the end of 2021, I suppose in terms of general business, there's a real profound sense of, look, we're in a world recession. We're probably insulated from it to a degree right now in terms of the supports. And I don't think we really have full sight of what's coming down the line. But from my own business perspective, I would like to feel that by the time we come to the summer of next year, and probably more in the July, August, as opposed to June, at the end of the 9-month period, that we will be in a better position in terms of trading. At what point will we be back to a more buoyant tourism industry? I think that'll be at least March 2022. That's a long time away. So it's about, I suppose, repivoting yourself domestically, but keeping your messaging internationally. Build on, I suppose, the segments that are available to us in terms of, gatherings, pent-up demand around that, and I think that will help us to get to that point. It's all, for me right now, it's all about getting to that point. And we're probably in a slightly different scenario, Brian. we probably don't have full-time hours available for everybody because of the wage subsidy scheme. What we're doing is we're encouraging training as part of the downtime. So we're actually kind of investing in the training, and we've made a provision for that because we know that we need so many of those great people and their skills when we do get going. I do apologize to someone in drilling in my house. I don't know where they came from or how they got in. So if you're hearing drill, it's not giving me a code message, or indeed yourselves. So I would say, in all likelihood, when will we be back to 2018 or 2019 levels? For me, that is, I don't know if we'll do it in 2022, but I think in 2023, all things being equal. But the only thing is, from a tourism and hospitality perspective, we bounce back very quickly. And there will be that whole sense of pent-up demand. My biggest concern actually is that we'll have enough people to be able to deliver what we want, because we're seen now as a vulnerable industry. So in terms of encouraging people into our career, keeping maybe a sense of safe bets everywhere else, and that's where we have to build in the skills base, and to almost market it. Look, this is a great career to be in, and all that goes with it, and to push the training there, and hoping that we're training people to, even if they're trying other things for another while, that they will come back to our industry. That's part of the investment for me. So that's a very complicated version of where you wanted to go to.
That's fantastic, Elena. Thanks for that. I suppose there's a couple of common threads coming through a lot of the presentations in your answer, and one of them is the idea of being strategic and linking back to the theme around learning and the inputs around training, upskilling, and so on. If there was a strategic response looking to the future, I think that might be something to take away. I'm going to keep moving and just go to Anne, who gave the presentation. A very interesting presentation. I really liked your ideas of connect and cope. Anne, had you a question for any of the panelists?
I'd like to just ask it generally to the other panelists. What have they learned about themselves through this?
Very good question, hard question. Again, I'm going to just I'm going to pick on one, if you don't mind, just
no problem, Dennis,
for some of the audience members to come in. So for no particular reason, Stephen, do you want to come back to Anne on that?
Yeah, I tell you what I've learned about myself is I'm an emotional wreck. That's what it is. I say it in my tour, and I give when I give in the jazz hands, and I say the Canadians were fighters, and we get into the trenches, and we did, way back when, and my ancestors and stuff like that. And I'm proud of not just me, what I've learned about me, and that I'm able to adapt. Like, just to speak to Brian's question earlier, is I don't know if Treaty City will be here in the same guise as it is in March 2021, and as Elaine was saying there in March 2022, but I am able to adapt, and even my team, they're very comprehensive. So if you put people in a situation, myself included, and you put their backs to the wall and said you have to survive, this is the new reality, then people are survivors. But yeah, I'm an emotional wreck, if that's
it does take its toll. It does.
To coin it.
But I do think too that I suppose from Brian and Elena's point of view, you're dealing with bigger numbers. I mean, I think I'd keel over if I had to be responsible for huge numbers of employees and stuff. So like, we're both in, dealing with smaller numbers, and I think it does allow us to be a bit more adaptable. But yeah, it does take its toll.
Absolutely. I think some of the points you made yourself, Anne, I picked up on them around the idea of well-being. It was part of Elena's input as well, and it came across in all of the presentation in different ways. So I want to move to a question from the audience. One is in there from Helen Fitzgerald, and it is to all of the panelists, but all the presentations really highlighted the need for businesses to be able to learn and adapt, and you've all demonstrated that. But when income is down, how do you, or how did you, find ways to resource learning and development? Your CPD, as you referenced, Elena, or your ongoing work that you were doing, Stephen or Anne, or Brian, if any of you want to look at that question. So Elena, has your hand up, yeah?
Yeah, so I suppose, look, we're blessed here in Limerick in terms of the resources that we have, or if we look at the Midwest Regional Skills Forum, which kind of filters, that offers a platform for connecting you with the relevant training. So the first thing is there's so much kind of free training available. It can be adapted in many cases to what you expressly need. And there's great flexibility been shown in terms of, whether it's available online or some of it can actually be in-house. It's starting to go in there as well, you know, obviously very much within the context of the guidelines. So the training itself, there's a lot of free options available. And I would say that's probably what most people are looking at. So the thing then is in terms of, I suppose, being able to afford to pay people to go to training, which I think both Brian and I touched on in different ways. For me, I suppose the subsidy, the wage subsidy has been, you know, the difference there. So for the days that we don't have enough work for people, because we've tried to keep on more, but we're trying to, you know, manage the time in terms of days off, or that time has been used for upskilling. So if we didn't have the subsidy, you know, I wonder how little we would have. There's obviously other grants available that are kind of associated with your rates, or, you know, we fall to Ireland specific ones, or, you know, you've Leo continuity vouchers. For some people, you're too small, for some, too big for others. But there has been some level of money trickling through those as well too. So really the cost is the time, and the time that you have to put in, I suppose, to make sure that you get the benefit of that training. You don't always get the benefit out of it, because some is, you know, more personal development or life skills or something that somebody needs, but you get the benefit, I suppose, in an indirect way. So I would say, you know, that if you have a training need, talk to the Midwest Regional Skills Forum, and maybe there's advice there, you know, in terms of, you know, how it you know, for the most part it's funded, but it's just how you're able to probably fund the time. And that's where the wage subsidies, you know, they make all the difference. But obviously there's maths involved with that as well, in terms of arriving at something that, I suppose, works for you. So that's just my input there. So
thanks, Elena. I might just ask Brian maybe briefly to respond to the same question. I was interested in some of the insights you gave us on how you've used a slot at the start of the day maybe to look at upskilling or training, you know, take it in bite sizes. Did you have any other observations on how you did manage to resource your training and your learning development needs, Brian?
Sorry, Dennis, I just see it on mute. Yeah, that, I suppose, has been the one that's been most widespread across departments. Two things I want to say, I suppose. This downturn, we call it, has also given us far more time than we ever had available in the past. And I suppose you have two choices. You can kind of look out the window and wonder when it's all going to resume, or you can get busy doing something about it. And we have certainly, I suppose, got through a huge amount more internal training than we ever did, as a result of the availability of people's time. And as I said, we do it now in kind of bite sizes at the beginning of service, whether it's the accommodation manager, housekeeping, meeting her team in the morning and allocating the rooms for servicing. They'll pick a particular topic and speak maybe 5 or 10 minutes about that. Similarly, before dinner service in the evening, they might talk about, you know, upselling drinks, or they might talk about techniques for clearing plates. But they're all kind of elements of service that, when they're all put together, make for a far more motivated and effective employee. But the other, I suppose, discovery we made by chance was that we had, for example, the statutory requirement for manual handling training. And we were kind of nervous about getting somebody in to undertake the manual or practical part of it. And we discovered that we had 2 employees on our books who actually had the skills and the qualification to provide the training. So sometimes I think looking within to the resources that you have in front of you can be quite revealing.
That's a brilliant insight, Brian. Yeah, and I think it came through in some of the other speakers. We're almost at the close, and I think the discussion has been really rich and fruitful. Just one last question for Anne. It's a question from a colleague in Cork, wondering about how your project, given its flexibility and the resilience and the combination of staff and board and volunteers, how easily do you think that could be transferred to another location, be it in Cork even, or maybe elsewhere in Limerick?
Okay, one of the things that we have said is that we would love other towns and communities to set up their own community grocery. One thing we do say is we can tell you what not to do. We'd be delighted to teach people what to do. You know, we've learned bit by bit what to do and how we've evolved. But the idea that, yeah, we serve the needs of the local community. Yeah, it is, I suppose, unique to Limerick, but the concept isn't unique, you know? But in many ways, I think what's lovely about the community grocery is that it does meet a lot of people's needs. And if you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that we try and hit different areas, like you have the areas of food security, that well-being, all of that. So, when there's a crisis, when the chips are down, you need the basics well. And anyway, this is what I spend my time thinking about, driving to and from the co-op. But it's look at there's no franchise on it. We have been asked about that before. It's something we've been discussing, etc. But the model, the idea, the concept, yeah, it's very replicable.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anne. And again, I think there's learning across all of what's happened this morning, and that's one piece that I will certainly take away and link with people. I suppose just to close out from my own perspective, there's a big sense of community today. We work as learning cities as a community across the island of Ireland with the other 4 cities from Cork, linking with yourselves in Limerick, Dublin, Belfast and Derry. And in terms of this morning's discussion, really the pandemic, the crisis, one of the phrases was, we're all in this together. And I think this morning's discussion has demonstrated the same thing, that in terms of the economic aspect of the crisis and the future, that we're also all in this together as a community. Every one of us is connected, and all of the businesses and the business perspectives we've heard this morning, they have ripple effects and resonances throughout all of the communities, and we all have to work together in whatever ways we can. So I'd like to thank, again, the organisers for asking me to play a part, and hand over to Emer as chair to close it out.
Dennis, thanks a million. As always, it's great working with you. We've worked in many different events over the years. I want to give a shout out to all our speakers again, and just say thank you very much for what was a very insightful and challenging presentation, to Stephen and Treaty City Breweries, obviously to Brian with the Radisson Hotel. Elena, thank you for your time. President of the Irish Hotel Federation, it was great to have you on board to share the national perspective with us. And Anne, it was really lovely to hear about the Cope and Connect and Cook and the whole perspective from the Urban Co-op. It would be remiss of me not to give a huge shout out to the coordinator of this festival every year, my colleague Yvonne Lane, who brings the whole thing together behind the scenes, in front of the scenes and every way. So Yvonne, if we were in the hall, we'd be giving you a big shout out in Boulevard. So we'd have to give you a virtual thank you and virtual hours and all that, and say thank you so much.
Thanks
and again, stay connected with us through UNESCO Learning City. And as they say at the end of everything, if you have time, dip into the rest of the events for Limerick Learning City and just look at, there's many events online for the remainder of the week. And now that you've dipped your toes in for this, maybe you could dip in again. I'll end with one expression. There's an old Irish Gaelic word for our overseas visitors called mehel, whereby it means we all come together and work together. It was to help a farmer in times of crisis. And I think it never had more truer meaning than in the sense of a pandemic and UNESCO Learning Cities. So I'll end the seminar this morning on that mehel, to help each other and maybe work our way through this crisis. Thanks to everybody. Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.
God bless. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, folks. Bye. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks, Emer. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Cheers, Dennis, as always. Thanks, guys.